Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to the MTG Arena set review for Ravnica Allegiance with the first part of the green cards. But before we dive in, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications if you're new to the channel to not miss out on the rest of the series and future content. And please consider whitelisting YouTube to help support the free content. That really means a lot. And now on to the cards. Okay, so first we have X-Bane Beast. The better Hill Giant in Limited, clearly not a constructed card. Hill Giants aren't that great these days anymore. Usually you get this extra stat point, either like a 4-3 or a 3-4. So it's pretty average, but not terrible. It's going to be an okay filler, but in multicolor heavy sets like this, there will often be like some multicolor cards in the same curve drop that outclass the usual size stuff. Next we have Biogenic Ooze. Mythic Rare, this could even be good in Standard, not 100% sure. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 2/2 Ooze token, and at the end of your the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each Ooze you control. So basically, when you play it, it's 2/3/3 bodies, and then you can keep making more tokens, and they also keep growing. So it's definitely a pretty powerful army in a can type card, but it is also pretty fragile in the beginning and fairly easily answered. So I'm not quite sure how playable it's gonna be in Standard with a lot of competition in the 5-card slot. But definitely a fairly powerful card. In Limited, this is a slam dunk bomb. This card is just super brutal, and if the opponent can't answer it right away, it will usually just win the game for you, so it's insane. Next we have Biogenic Upgrade. 6 mana sorcery. You get 3 +1/+1 counters that you can distribute among up to 3 target creatures of your choice, and then you double the number of +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. So effectively it gives you 6 counters to put on up to 3 creatures, each of them gaining +2/+2, or one of them +4/+4 and the other +2/+2, or one +6/+6. It also has synergy obviously with Riot and Adapt in Simic and Gruul, since it also doubles the counters that are already there. So if you put this on creatures that already have +1/+1 counters, you get extra counters out of this. So this actually can create a whole lot of stats. It is pretty good in Limited. It's not as good maybe as it might seem, since it is a bit clunky and a bit situational, but it is still pretty powerful and a fairly high pick. Not a constructed card though. Next we have Endres Forerunners, an 8-cost 7/7, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, similar to the Behemoth. When Endres Forerunners enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain +2/+2 Vigilance and Trample, so it also brings kind of an overrun with it. A bit smaller one, but more utilitarian than what Behemoth did. It's basically very similar to Behemoth, except in Constructed, Behemoth is gonna always be better, and in Limited, an 8-drop is pretty heavy, and with the high power level and big creatures in this format, I think churning out an 8-drop is not that likely, so even in Limited it doesn't seem too playable usually. Next we have Enraged Sarah, 4 mana 4/4 that can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, which isn't that relevant, just prevents it from getting like gang blocked too easily. It is above the curve with 4 mana 4/4, and 4 mana 4/4s are usually pretty good in Limited. This is slightly worse than it would normally be, because Gruul has a better common in R-Rings that is a 4/4 trample that can also be a 3/3 haste and has an ability that pumps it. So for an uncommon, this is a bit underwhelming. It's still a very solid pick and a fairly high pick, but a bit outshined by its common counterpart. Not a constructed card, obviously. Next we have Gatebreaker Ram. That's a pretty cool card and also a pretty strong card actually. It gets +1/+1 for each gate you control, and as long as you control 2 or more gates, it also has Vigilance and Trample. This can grow out of hand really quick. It's a really strong payoff for the gate-themed deck in Limited, and even could be playable in a gate-themed deck in Standard. I have played against people messing around with, say, Timur gates decks and stuff like that, and this is definitely a really powerful creature in a deck like that. And then Limited, if you're in the gates deck, this is a slam dunk. Otherwise, you probably don't want enough gates in your deck to make this good enough. Next we have Gift of Strength. It's a 2-mana combat trick, +3/+3 and reach. Nothing exciting, but very solid. Definitely decent playable. Also helps green, especially Gruul, a bit with flyers, which can be a problem. So just a decent role player, nothing excited, no high pick, just something that you pick up along the way and probably play at least one copy in your deck usually. Next we have Growth Chamber Guardian. This card's actually pretty cool. In Standard, like a 2-mana 2/2 might seem a bit underwhelming, but between synergies with other +1/+1 counter stuff like Rhythm of the Wild and its own ability, it is actually pretty nice. So it's effectively like a 2-mana 2/2 or a 5-mana 4/4 that gets you an additional copy of itself, which both is slightly below the curve maybe, but also very flexible and gives you nice value. I messed around with this in a Gruul Rhythm of the Wild deck in Standard a bit, and the card was quite impressive and played really well. It gives you something to do on your off turns, gives you some mana sink later, and provides a really nice body. And you can even play it with Rhythm of the Wild with Riot, putting a counter on it, and then it's just a 2-mana 3/3 that gets you an additional copy right away. Like you can go turn 3 Rhythm, turn 4 2 3/3s, one of them for free, and then have another one in your hand as backup, for example. And that sort of stuff. And in Limited, I mean, a 2-mana 2/2 is great, and one that turns into a 4/4 is, for 3 mana, is even better. So even without another copy, this is really good in Limited. Next we have Gruul Beastmaster. Another okay 4-drop. It's not that great since it's a bit small. The fact that it has Riot makes it pretty flexible. It's either a 2/2 haste or a 3/3, and whenever it attacks, another target creature you control gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is Gruul Beastmaster's power. Card is pretty aggressive and can be quite swingy, but it's also a bit fragile. So definitely a solid playable in Limited, but not too exciting since it is a bit fragile and a bit understated to make up for the ability and flexibility it has. Okay, next we have Guardian Project. Rare enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. So basically it lets you draw cards for the first copy of creatures you play. In Constructed, this seems very non-abusable, also pretty expensive and slow and underwhelming, so don't see this doing anything. And even in Limited, this is not that great, but it is probably solid. Like if your deck can be dirtily enough to support this card and has mostly unique creatures, this can be a nice card advantage engine, but I feel like the format might be a bit too fast and powerful to dirtle this hard. So my guess would be it's not great in Limited either. Next we have Incubation Druid, 2-mana 0/2 that ramps you and fixes your colors because it gives you mana of a color a land you control could produce, so it helps you fix double and triple card stuff, but doesn't actually fix your first mana of a given color. So gotta keep that in mind. It also has Adapt, turning it into a 3/5 later when it isn't needed as a mana dog anymore, which is always great. Mana dogs that can be turned into relevant cards later are always great. And this also turns into a hyper ramp card once it is adapted. So yeah, this could also be very interesting in Standard, especially with ways to give it counters for cheap, making this a really nice, powerful ramp card. Not sure if there is a deck that would want this, but it's definitely a card to keep in the back of your head and see if there's a nice deck it fits in and that can kind of get around the adapt and make it better at ramping without dumping a whole lot of mana into it. And yeah, in Limited, a 2-drop accelerant like this is usually a pretty high pick, especially if it isn't blank later. Next we have Mammoth Spider, so basically Giant Spider's big brother, costs 1 mana more, is +1/+1 bigger. Nothing super exciting here, but very solid. A bit worse than Giant Spider, arguably, because in the 5-drop slot you usually want a bit more impact than this, and as a 4-mana 2/4, Giant Spider already does a really good job, so having to spend a whole mana more just for the +1/+1 instead isn't that valuable. And yeah, these days in Limited, outside of course that the unit sizing is pretty big, so there's a fair share of other 5-drops that this can't even block and that just run this over. Next we have Open the Gates. Nice solid fixing, search your library for basic land card or gate card. So a really good card for a gate heavy deck or just fixing for a bit slower green deck like a non-aggressive green deck, and also very playable in Standard potentially if there is a gate themed deck basically. Next we have Rampage of the Clans, so basically a bad Fracturing Gust. For green and 3, at instant speed you get to destroy all artifacts and enchantments, and the controller gets a 3/3 green centaur for each permanent destroyed this way. So yeah, there are better cards in Constructed that do this type of thing. This is mainly something that you care about in modern and older formats, and there you have access to better cards. So, and in Limited this is not even a consideration. Card is pretty bad all in all. And last but not least for the first half, we have Rampaging Renthorn, a 5-mana 4/4 Riot. So this is either a 5-mana 4/4 Haste or a 5-mana 5/5. Both are pretty good. In situations where the 5-mana 4/4 Haste comes in, it is pretty nice. That's one of the Riot cards that is more likely to actually be played with Haste occasionally in Limited. Most others are usually just played with a counter, but this at the top end of the curve in an aggressive deck can be really nice with Haste if it still outclasses the board. I played a bit with it already and played it like half the time with Haste almost. So yeah, a very solid 5-drop, nothing super exciting, but a very robust, good playable that is an easy pickup like middle of the pack or maybe a bit earlier even. Okay, that concludes the first half of the green cards. As usual, I'll be back tomorrow with the second half of the green cards. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what you think. Hit the like button if you do enjoy it. Share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. And please consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock if you haven't already. That's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. I thank you for watching and I see you next time. Bye.